Hello and welcome back. Now, do you remember a few weeks ago we were looking at the 4 assay offices of Newcastle, Chester, Exeter and York? Well, we had a break when we'd done Chester, and now I've scrabbled round and got some pieces hopefully to show you, and we'll have a look at Exeter. Now, Exeter's very interesting because it's almost more productive in the earlier period than in the later period. So you can still go as a collector and find quite early and quite important pieces of Exeter silver. I've certainly, for clients in the past, purchased Elizabethan pieces. So although they are getting phenomenally rare now, but you can find examples from the 17th century. Now, part of that is because of the tremendous industry and trade and wealth of Exeter during that period, and also because there is no formal system of assay, so you have little pockets of goldsmiths working all around Exeter in associated areas. So often this field is called West Country silver. So I'll give you an example. Here's a lovely early apostle spoon, and this is West Country. It wasn't made in Exeter, but it falls under that umbrella. And it's so typical of spoons of the period in that we'll look at all of these things in close-up, or most of them. It just has a single maker's mark, TP, in the bowl. That's for Thomas Punchard of Totnes. He was working in Totnes in the 1630s and then latterly moved to Dartmouth. And you will find that most West Country silversmiths will only strike a maker's mark in this very early period, and we're talking between about 1570 up to 1701, when you get a formal system of assay. Just like with Newcastle, up until 1701, you don't have a formal system of assay. That gets introduced. So people are doing their own thing. There is an Exeter town mark that is employed by lots of goldsmiths working there. It isn't mandatory, and it is the letter X, either in a dotted circle or under a crown. And you'll find that on Elizabethan silver. You'll find it on pieces throughout the 17th century, but you'll also find a lot of Exeter goldsmiths not using it as well, and just striking their name or their maker's mark and a device. The West Country was enormously productive when it came to silver spoons, early silver spoons. You can't fail to go and find a lovely Charles I example of an Exeter spoon, or some associated provincial area. So, I mean, that's remarkable, because when it comes to places like Newcastle, York and Chester, it's nearly impossible. York, you will very, very occasionally find an early spoon, a seal top or an apostle, but only very rarely. And again, with Newcastle, it rarely happens. And yet with Exeter, there is, I mean, it might be overstressing it to say an abundance, but they are out there. So you can find a piece of silver which, like this, is, nearly 400 years old and in lovely condition. So Holloware is more difficult to find. You do get porringers, you do get mugs. The most productive period for Exeter Holloware, as we would know it, things like tankards and coffee pots and chocolate pots, waiters and candlesticks, is around 1700 to 1750. That's when you see the larger amount of things. But you can find smaller things from the 17th century. Now, this is an example of a piece. This is, some of you might be thinking porringer. It is in fact an extremely rare, emphasise extremely rare, English wine taster. Not like the French ones at all. It's more functional. And this is marked, again, only with the maker's mark, struck twice on the base. IA for John Avery of Exeter. But it's, a sensationally rare thing, made between 1690 and about 1701. Because after 1701, this would have been submitted for assay and have a full set of marks on it. And also the style of it is very much late 17th century, but it is possible to find, you know, pieces which aren't spoons for Exeter, which is quite rare. Now, 1701, they institute the assay office. You get a full series of Britannia standard marks, and then of course in 1720 it turns over to sterling standard marks. Now an example, a superb example of Britannia standard Exeter silver is something we've seen in an earlier film, which is this lovely strainer, actually made in Plymouth by Henry Tolcher in about 1705, 1710, with a single Britannia stamp, Exeter Assay Office Britannia stamp on the back. So even though Tolcher is working in Plymouth, he is submitting his work in Exeter. And that's the effect of them bringing in the assay office. The habit that had grown up in the 17th century of goldsmiths like Punchard, working and simply applying a mark, not submitting anything to Exeter Assay Office because they didn't really have one. That's out of the window. If Punchard was working at the same period, he would then be doing what Tolcher is doing. He would be submitting his wares to Exeter. Now we've got a fabulous set of marks. We'll look at these in close up. This is if you get into West Country and Exeter silver, a lot of it is going to be about spoons. You probably won't find many better than that. That is you might call it a serving spoon or a basting spoon or a ragu spoon. Because I'm old-fashioned, I call them basting spoons, but they probably more correctly called serving spoons. This sadly doesn't have a maker's mark. It's never had one. There is a light impression here, so it is entirely possible that the goldsmith struck his mark so lightly that it's actually become polished out, or it was reworked at some point. When he got it back from assay, he'd just gone over it and that obliterated that mark. But it has fantastic impressions of the sterling standard Exeter marks for 1725, and it's got the best impression. We'll look at this in close-up. The best impression of an Exeter leopard's head that you'll probably ever see. Just absolutely wonderful. That leopard's head disappears in 1777, 1778. For the reason I don't know, but rather like Chester abandoning it in the 1840s, it vanishes, it goes. So there is this, I think this cachet, this wonderful golden period of Exeter silver, which is 1700 up to about 1760, where you're getting formal assay, you're getting date letters, so you can pinpoint when something is made, and you're getting larger wares made. You're getting the big mugs and tankards and chocolate pots. After about 1750, Exeter goes into decline financially, and you find that from that point onwards, you're looking at things like tablespoons, sugar tongs, buckles, small silver. Very rarely do you find then a large piece of silver as you would in London. You won't really find teapots or caddies or anything like that from that period. This is something that is sort of on the cusp. This is 1758. This is not typical. Those of you that are Spoon Club members will have seen an article about this last year. Sadly, it is from the collection of the late Tony Dove. As with most of the things that he collected, they are wonderful for numerous reasons. This was a soup ladle made by Roger Berryman Simons of Plymouth, assayed in Exeter in 1758, but it was then sent to Ireland about 25 years later, and it was reworked probably in Limerick, where the unknown Limerick goldsmith added his maker's mark to the back of it. But we know all the history of that. I won't go into it now. It's a long tale. But if you look at, if you're a member of the Spoon Club, you'll find an article about this rather fine soup ladle, which is both Exeter and Irish. I don't think there's another piece like it in the world, to be perfectly honest. It's remarkable. But you still get things like this in the 1750s and 1760s at Exeter, but then it becomes spoons and flatware. Now, I'm going on a little, so I'll stop it here and we'll pick it up in part 2.